very much.
You're welcome.
Not just for this evening, but everything else that you're doing.
Thank you.
This is what we need. It's going to come down to people. About all the issues I'm talking about tonight, it's people. People are having to do what government should be doing. What we're paying government bureaucrats to do, we're having to do it because they're not doing their job. They're working for the corporations, not for us. You talked about action, empowerment, and so on. I have a nice phrase I use, and that is that affecting change, which is what we want, affecting change is like driving a nail through a piece of wood. The experts can sharpen the nail, but they can't push it through the wood. You need the hammer of public opinion to drive that nail home. So I will provide some ammunition tonight on several issues, I hope, but it's going to be this group Contact, and your support for that group that's going to drive the nails home. Just a little bit of my past. I grew up in England, and when I was 12 years old, my Latin teacher shared with us this definition of an educated person. He said an educated person is someone who can entertain his or herself, not with video games, with something else. They didn't have those things. Who can entertain a friend and entertain a new idea. And that's what we're talking about here. We're having to get people in the United States to entertain a new idea that fluoridation, which has been sold to us as the best thing since sliced bread, is an atrocious policy. And some of the other things which have been sold to us through public relations are atrocious ideas. And I was driving in my hometown of Binghamton just a few days ago, and Garrison Keillor has this lovely thing on poetry in the morning and words for something, and he read this quote from Henrik Ibsen. You know, Ibsen wrote a play called Enemy of the People, and if you haven't read Enemy of the People, it's what many of us have to go through. We bring the news of harm, and then we are the problem, not the issue itself. And he wrote this: it's not only what we have inherited from our father and mother that walks in us. It's all sorts of dead ideas and lifeless old beliefs and so forth. They have no vitality, but they cling to us all the same. We cannot shake them off. Whenever I take up a newspaper, I seem to see ghosts gliding between the lines. There must be ghosts all the country over, as thick as the sands of the sea. And then we are, one and all, so pitifully afraid of the light. And that's what we have with fluoridation. We have professional bodies and public health agencies, not only in the United States, but in Australia, in New Zealand, in Ireland, in England, throughout Canada, who are pitifully afraid of facing up to the science of this, and yet they still have the gall to accuse us of being anti-scientific, flat earth society, and so on. But I'm not just talking about fluoridation. Most of what I'm going to be talking about tonight is going to be about fluoridation, but there are 9 other things, 9 other toxics that we should be getting out of our lives, and I suspect I'm flogging several dead horses here and you're already converted, but again, that's not the issue. The issue is to get more ammunition to fight some of these things and make the changes that we want. So the first toxic is what I've already mentioned. Let's get fluoride out of the public water supply. It's something that we're doing to ourselves. Many of the other toxics are legacies. And legacies are things which we thought were good at some time. Now we realize they're bad, and we have a problem. We're still trying to get the PCBs, thank you Monsanto, PCBs out of the sediments of the Great Lakes, out of the body fat of our babies and parents. But these are legacies. Once upon a time they thought the PCBs were miracle liquids for transformers. They didn't burn very easily. But this is something that we're doing to ourselves. Elaine mentioned I've been involved in this for quite a time. I've been involved in waste management, fighting incineration for 28 years. And that's taken me to 49 states, 7 provinces in Canada, and 61 other countries. And I say all that because when my wife, 18 years ago, brought up the issue of fluoridation, I said, take it away. These people are crazy. I didn't want a third issue. I was trying to teach chemistry full-time, and every weekend and holiday, I'm traveling around somewhere. I didn't want a third issue I had no time. And I certainly didn't want an issue that was going to stigmatize me as looney tunes, which is not healthy for a professor. Anyway, I thought it was going to be a quick campaign. I thought when people heard what we found out from the literature, it would be over. But it was not. It's the most difficult, the most frustrating thing I've ever been involved in. It's changed my attitudes to many aspects of our society, not least of which is a complete lack of courage from many academics, and a complete lack of ethics from our doctors, and of course lack of integrity in government bureaucracy. But okay, this is sad things. Anyway, with two other scientists, and this is key. I'd written the first draft of this particular book. We have a few copies with us. I'd written the first draft of this, and I was getting input. I was getting input from peers, and these two guys gave me such great input. James Beck, an MD, PhD from Calgary, physicist, and then Spenny Micklem, a biologist, Oxford trained, taught at Edinburgh University. They gave me such great input that I asked them to be co-authors, and they changed the book. They got the tone right, it's understated, not overstated, everything is rigorously documented. There are 80 pages of references. That was published in 2010, and to my dismay, I'd hoped that it would raise the level of debate, that we'd reach some independent scientists, that we would get some doctors, some dentists to rethink this, because it was written for them, it was all documented. But there hasn't been a single written critique of this book since it was published, not a one trying to dismiss the arguments. And one of the most depressing moments was in New Zealand. Well, it wasn't depressing at the time, but in subsequent. Just after it was published, I was invited to give a talk to the Ministry of Health in New Zealand on this subject. And there were about 20 people there. I was only expecting 3 or 4, but 20 people came. So I went through the book, and I got to the end. I said, look, you know, we as 3 scientists, opponents of fluoridation, have done everything that you could expect from us. We've laid out our case, it's completely transparent, everything is documented. We've done our job. Now it's your turn. Take this book, get your experts, you've got a lot of them in this office, take your experts and critique it. Respond in kind and show us where we're wrong. And if you can't show us where you're wrong, you should stop promoting this practice. Well, they didn't stop promoting it. They didn't respond. Not one word from them responding to this text. And yet, just a few months ago, the Minister of Health went on television chastising the opponents of fluoridation as being unscientific and misrepresenting the literature. I mean, talk about rubbing salt into the wound. So, anyway, let's get on with the issue. There are certain undeniable facts which any of you will find out if you start to read the literature, or if you've found them out already. The first one is, and the one that really struck me, is that the level of fluoride in mother's milk is very low. Let's just remind ourselves what mother's milk is. It's the best meal for the baby. It took millions of years of the best chemist, the best biochemist in existence, i.e. Mother Nature, to determine this first meal for the baby. And wouldn't you think if fluoride was necessary for anything, that's where you would find it? You don't. It's very, very low in mother's milk. The level in mother's milk is 0.004 parts per million. That means right now in the state of Connecticut, where you have mandatory fluoridation, thousands, if not millions of women are bottle feeding their baby at levels of fluoride which are 175 to 300 times higher than they would be getting from mother's milk. So did nature screw up on this? Or did a bunch of dentists from Chicago screw up on this? Well, the answer is the dentists from Chicago screwed up. It's reckless to give a baby 200 times more fluoride than nature deemed appropriate. Secondly, relating to that, there's not one single process in the body, one single bit of biochemistry that's ever been shown to need fluoride. You'll see how fluoride interacts with the teeth later on, but it's nothing internal. From what we can see, the only thing that fluoride does is to cause damage. And the first opponents of fluoridation in the United States were biochemists. Nobel Prize winners in biochemistry oppose fluoridation because they use fluoride to inhibit enzymes. And they knew that enzymes are absolutely vital for our health. So we've since then we found out that fluoride causes all kinds of other problems, including switching on G proteins. And if anybody wants to ask me a question about that, we have to talk about it. Many biological processes then have been harmed by fluoride, given a sufficient concentration. That's always the caveat. Fact number 4, another striking thing, about 50 to 60% of the fluoride we ingest each day is excreted by the kidney. Now the baby's kidney can do less of that. I think the baby excretes maybe 20%. The rest of the fluoride then accumulates in our bones and the other hard tissues, the other calcifying tissues. And this accumulation steadily increases over a lifetime unless we remove the source of the fluoride. And we know from India and China that fluoride poisons the bone. We have a condition called skeletal fluorosis, and the first symptoms of skeletal fluorosis are identical to arthritis. Stiffness in the joints, pains in the joints, pains in the bones. And we have millions of people in the United States with arthritis. About 1 in 3 adults have some form of arthritis. And I'm not saying that all arthritis is caused by fluoride, that's ridiculous. But the thing that's shocking is that no US health agency and no health agency in any fluoridated country has bothered to check to see if there's a relationship between these escalating arthritis rates and exposure to fluoride every day of the week, the year. Fact number 5, the chemicals used to fluoridate are not the pharmaceutical grade that you get in toothpaste, but hazardous waste products from the phosphate fertilizer industry. And I can go into what they are and the chemistry of that. But the thing that I think is the simplest thing to point out is that these are contaminated. And one of the contaminants is arsenic. Is arsenic. Now, arsenic is a known human carcinogen. It causes cancer. And therefore, any amount, the EPA's position is that any amount of a chemical that causes cancer is unsafe. There's no safe level. Which means that by virtue of using these contaminated fluoridating chemicals, we are increasing the cancer rates in the United States. There's no argument about that. The only argument is just how much are we increasing it. And of course, this does not also discount the fact that fluoride itself may cause cancer. So fact number 6, most countries do not fluoridate their water. Now, the first thing that people find out about fluoridation is that, oh, everybody is doing it. 73% of the American population is drinking fluoridated water. And if any town has not fluoridated yet, they're behind the times. They're not progressive. They're not this, that, and the other. Catch up. Well, the fact is the vast majority of countries do not fluoridate their water. 97% of Western European population does not drink fluoridated water. 4 of those countries have fluoridated salts, but that gives people some informed choice on this matter. But the vast majority of European countries neither fluoridate their salt nor their water. And yet, according to the World Health Organization data, the tooth decay in these non-fluoridated countries are no different from the tooth decay in fluoridated countries. Now, here's a graph that our colleague, Chris Neurath, did, where the World Health Organization data was plotted from the 1960s to the present, and you can see that tooth decay has been coming down universally, whether these countries are fluoridated or not. Now, the top 12 are fluoridated, and the bottom 4, non-fluoridated, and the bottom 4 are fluoridated. Can you tell which is which? Let's do it another way. This is the tooth decay coming down in 4 countries which fluoridate: New Zealand, Australia, Ireland, and the United States. Now let's look at the tooth decay coming down in countries which are not fluoridated. It's a wash. Now, there's an explanation for this, and we'll say that up front a little bit. The fact number 8, and this is the explanation. In 1999, the Centre for Disease Control, which the Oral Health Division of the Centre for Disease Control, which is about 30 people, they're all dentists, dentally trained people, they said that fluoridation is one of the top great public health achievements of the 20th century, which was hardly an unbiased view, since their job is to promote fluoridation. But it's certainly very effective when people hear about that. CDC says blah, blah. Anyway, in the statement, the paper that underlined or underpinned their 1999 statement, they admitted that the predominant benefit of fluoride is topical. It works on the outside of the tooth, not systemic. It works on the outside of the tooth, not from inside the body. And in my view, that should have been the end of fluoridation right there. It works on the outside of the tooth. Why are we swallowing it when we've got fluoridated toothpaste, which is universally available? There, incidentally, are the quotes. Its actions primarily are topical. Disease control 99. Fluoride's predominant effect is post-eruptive and topical. By the way, any pediatrician who's giving pregnant women tablets or babies drops of fluoride should go back to medical school, or at least read something. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous that now we know that the benefits are post-eruptive, that any pregnant woman should be poisoning herself and her fetus with fluoride. It's ridiculous. There's no benefit for doing it, maybe harm. Fluoridation violates common sense, and if fluoride works on the outside of the tooth, why swallow it? Why put it in the drinking water? These are arguments that you can use with legislators. They say, look, here's the statement. This is what the CDC says. If it works topically, Senator, why are we forced to swallow it? Why are you putting it in the drinking water? Why aren't you instead putting money into buying fluoridated toothpaste if that's what you want? I don't want that, but if you do, that's the way to go. And if you, yeah, exactly. This way, if you use this approach, you avoid exposing every tissue in the body to a known toxic substance, and you avoid forcing it on people that don't want it. And for many people, that is the key argument. They don't want them, whether it's good or bad or indifferent, they don't want the government to force them to take medication. This is our right to determine. And look at the AMA's website. The AMA makes it very clear. Informed consent. Look at informed consent. A doctor is required to tell you what the benefits of a drug are and what the side effects are. And you are meant to choose. After you hear him or her, you have the right to choose. And if he tried to force you and said, you've got to drink this green stuff because it's going to make you whatever, and try to put pressure on you to drink this, and you didn't want it, he or she could lose their license. That's how strongly they hold this, check yourself, the AMA. And yet these guys are all standing by when millions of people in the United States are being forced to take this drug. And by the way, some people argue it's not a medicine. It's not a medicine. Come on. A definition of a medicine is a substance used to treat or mitigate a disease. That's what you're using. You are using fluoride to fight tooth decay, which is a disease. So it is definitely a medicine. Okay. Fact number 9. Based upon dental fluorosis rates, and I'll explain what that is in a moment, American kids are being hugely, as you said, Elaine, hugely overexposed to fluoride from water. 41% of American kids now have dental fluorosis. And to put that into context, when they started this practice in 45, they believed that 1/2 of a million in lower tooth decay in kids, but you get about 10% of children will get dental fluorosis, but in a very mild form, which only a dentist could recognize. This is very mild dental fluorosis. So to be fair, this is the worst. This is the worst range of dental fluorosis. This is up to 25% of the tooth enamel has this white spots, white mottling, opaque patches. And it's at the least severe, you'd see little white patches on the cusp of the teeth here. And you've probably noticed that yourselves amongst your friends and neighbors. So they expected 10% of the kids to get this. In 2010, the CDC admitted that 41% of all American children aged 12 to 15, and this is an average, between kids living in fluoridated and non-fluoridated. So the kids in the fluoridated communities are well above 41%. Had dental fluorosis. And here are the numbers. 28.5% very mild, that's what I showed you. 8.6% had mild, and 3.6% had moderate or severe. And this is what they look like. This is mild, which is up to 50% of the tooth enamel impacted, and moderate or severe, 100% of the tooth enamel is impacted. And with the severe, you also get brittleness of the teeth, and that is now being classified as a severe, as a health effect. Now, the key question that was not asked back in the 1940s when this started, when the US government endorsed it in 1950, was when fluoride is damaging the growing tooth cells, and we can see it, what's it doing to the tissues that we can't see? What's it doing to the kids' bones? The teeth grow out of the bones in the jaw. What's it doing to their brains? What's it doing to their endocrine system? They didn't ask these questions, and they certainly didn't do much research on it. And they're still not doing much research on it. Their attitude is, if you don't look, you don't find. But meanwhile, the studies are coming in from China and India, places that have high natural levels of fluoride, causing large areas with endemic fluorosis. And these endemic fluorosis, if you go to the villages there, as I've done, you'll find all the kids have dental fluorosis, which we have, and many of the adults have skeletal fluorosis. And they see this as a spectrum. The first, what you see is damage to the teeth, but if you continue to have that same exposure, then you're going to get skeletal fluorosis, or some people are going to get it. So, since the 1990s, there's been extensive evidence that fluoride damages the brains of animals and humans. And I'm going to give you a list of the studies now. One of the key questions that you can ask any obstreperous dentist who rolls his eyes, or doctors who rolls their eyes when you mention fluoridation, heaven help it if you mention it at a cocktail party. Oh, you're not one of those, are you? Get the tinfoil hat and all that stuff. Just tell me something. There's quite a bit of literature now out there that fluoride damages the brain. What have you read? What have you read that allows you to continue this practice, that has convinced you that we can ignore all these studies? Okay? And what's their answer? Oh, that's Chinese. They're negated in some way. But the fact is, none of the proponents can offer a body of science to negate what I'm about to show you, which is there are now over 40 animal studies that show prolonged exposure to fluoride damages the brain, where it's happening, there's all kinds of mechanisms. 19 animal studies that show that mice and rats ingesting fluoride have difficulty learning and remembering. You know, they dose the animal, put them in a little maze, see how well they learn. And they don't learn so well. 12 studies, neurobehavioral effects. 3 human studies shows that fluoride damages the fetal brain, and 37 out of 43 published studies shows that fluoride lowers IQ. And I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. As Elaine pointed out, there was a Harvard review, Philip Grandjean and Anna Choi, a couple of other Chinese researchers. They did a meta-analysis of 27 studies. They were able to do a meta-analysis because the methodology was the same. They compared the IQ of children in villages with high fluoride exposure and villages with low fluoride exposure. All but about 3 of these exposure was fluoride in the drinking water, natural fluoride in the drinking water. And about 3 of them were from coal burning exposure, because in some Chinese villages they cook with coal, they heat with coal, and then not with poor ventilation. That too can cause fluorosis. Anyway, so they put them all into one box and did some statistical analysis. It was published in the Environmental Health Perspectives, which is one of the leading environmental health journals in the world. And they acknowledged that there were many weaknesses in these studies, that they would have preferred to have had more information that were present in some of these studies. But they also said that the results were remarkably consistent. Remarkably consistent. Out of 27 studies, 26 of them showed a lowering of IQ. This is from all parts of China and a couple of studies from Iran. And to get that consistency out of such a wide geographical areas with different universities, different researchers doing it, is pretty remarkable. The average lowering of IQ was about 7 IQ points, which is substantial, as you'll see in a moment. Now, the promoters have dealt with this by saying, oh, well, the concentrations in those villages were so high, they're not relevant to the fluoridation in the United States. Ding, 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 ding. Anybody that says that has no idea of the first lesson of toxicology, which is the difference between concentration and dose. You can't say it's okay because this village has a concentration. In this village, the concentration was, say, 4 parts per million or 5 parts per million, and we only fluoridated 1 parts per million, because you can't control the dose with fluoridation. So some high water consumers in a 1 part per million village are going to get a higher dose than consumers in a low water consumers in a high fluoride village. The doses overlap. The concentrations are different, but the doses overlap. And not to recognize that is either that they're incompetent or it's self-serving. They're propagandists. We can use that later on. However, in 2 of the studies, yes, the high range went up to 11 parts per million. That is pretty high. But all the rest were less than 10 parts per million. And 9 of the studies, the high fluoride village was actually less than 3 parts per million. Here's 5 of those studies: 1.82, 2.9, 2.5, 2.38. That offers no margin of safety to protect all our kids from the lowering of IQ caused by fluoride. And if you were to do, as I've done, if we take that lowest level, 1.8 parts per million, as our starting point, we could even take the higher one, 2.9, and do standard regulatory procedures that are practiced by the EPA with safety factors. Then it would turn out that in order to protect all our children, including the most sensitive, you wouldn't want American children to be drinking more than 2 teaspoonfuls of fluoridated water a day. That's if you do the standard thing. But they won't do that. The EPA Office of Water, even though they were asked by the National Research Council to do this risk assessment, for 8 years have delayed, and the last thing they told us is that they're more interested in protecting the fluoridation program, i.e. children's teeth, than they are in protecting our health. So they are threatening to use severe dental fluorosis as the endpoint of concern, the most sensitive endpoint. And I say, wait a moment, guys. Unless you can show that in those 26 studies, in all 26 studies, all those kids had severe dental fluorosis, and not moderate or mild, then you don't have a leg to stand on to say that the most sensitive endpoint is severe dental fluorosis. So this is just one example where you see politics trampling all over honest science. Philip Grandjean, who's very famous for his mercury work, says fluoride seems to fit in with lead, mercury, and other poisons that cause chemical brain drain. Just published a book on this called Only One Chance with our kids. The effect of each toxicant may seem small, but the combined damage on the population scale can be serious, especially because the brain power of the next generation is crucial to all of us. Now I want to illustrate that with these diagrams. And these diagrams are critically important because they don't just apply to fluoride, they apply to any neurotoxin. And the principle is it applies to anything which has toxic effects, this normal distribution. We, as human beings, respond in a normal distribution fashion, the famous bell-shaped curve, whether you're talking about height, weight, response to toxics, response to medicine, whatever. We have this normal distribution where the average, the average people cluster around an average response, and you're going to get some people over here with very sensitive and other people over here who are very robust. So look at those two tails, because they become very important to us. With IQ, above an IQ of about 130, you're very bright or you're a genius. Over the area under that curve. That area under that curve is the fraction of the whole population which is very bright or genius. And this area here, less than 70, is the fraction of the population which is mentally handicapped. Now, if you were to shift the IQ down by 5 IQ points, don't forget in these studies it was shifted down by 7 IQ points, you wouldn't notice much of a difference here. The average child would go from 100 to 95. And if you were a parent of 2 kids, you wouldn't notice the difference between the kid that has 95 and the kid that has 100. If you're a school teacher, you wouldn't notice. Okay. But look what happens to the two tails. You halve the number of geniuses in your society, you double the number of mentally handicapped. This has huge economic and social ramifications for our society. And if you find that there's a chemical out there that is a neurotoxin, which is what they now describe fluoride as a neurotoxin, and you have a way of stopping exposing a whole population to this, obviously you should do it. We don't normally have the luxury of being able to turn the tap like that, to turn the tap off. We could with lead. We took lead out of gasoline and you saw the lead levels in children's blood go right down almost immediately. But we don't usually have that luxury. But here we have this totally unnecessary practice. It could be compromising our children's mental development. We have the option. We can turn it off. And if the precautionary principle does not apply here, it applies nowhere. If it doesn't apply here, just get rid of that precautionary principle and stop wasting our intellectual time with such nonsense. Precautionary principle says you don't have to be absolutely certain that a particular chemical out there causes harm. But if you've got a certain body of evidence, and you can go through a whole series, and I do it in the book, there's a chapter on the precautionary principle, if in doubt, get it out.